I told you that the consultant doing the best work on your team could be the one nobody notices? And that being the most qualified, most experienced person in the room might actually be hurting your business instead of helping it. Today's guest learned this lesson the hard way when he nearly gave his best employee a failing performance review simply because that person was too humble to promote their own work. That near mistake revealed something most of us resist. In consulting, being invisible means being irrelevant, even when you're brilliant. Here's the uncomfortable truth: doing exceptional work isn't enough. Working harder isn't the answer. And trying to be better than everyone else, that's exactly what's keeping you stuck competing on price with every other consultant who has the same credentials as you. But what if there was a completely different approach? One that doesn't require you to work longer hours, get more certifications, or somehow magically become more qualified than you already are? What if the key to standing out, commanding premium rates, and attracting ideal clients is actually about embracing what makes you different, even the parts you've been hiding? My name is AJ Riedel. This is Thriving Through, the podcast where each week I have real conversations with successful, seasoned self employed consultants about what it really takes to build a profitable, sustainable, and fulfilling consulting practice. Today's conversation with Stever Robbins will challenge everything you've been taught about success. Stever hosted the Get It Done Guy podcast with over 36 million downloads. He's an executive coach, 10-time entrepreneur, and holds degrees from MIT and Harvard Business School. But his biggest business differentiator, being raised in a traveling, new age, polyamorous hippie commune. In this episode, Stever shares why traditional success were myths, work hard, do good work, build impressive credentials, often fail self-employed consultants. And more importantly, he reveals a positioning strategy that actually does work, being different instead of being better. If you've ever felt like you're doing everything right, but still struggling to stand out, command the rates you deserve, or escape feast or famine cycles, this conversation will give you a completely new framework for thinking about your consulting business. Let's dive in. Welcome to this episode of the Thriving Through podcast. Today, my guest is Stever Robbins. And Stever, I tell me what you just told me about your name.
Sure. Well, it's easy to remember. The last name is Robbins, like Tony Robbins, and the first name is Stever, as in more Steve than the other Steves. So I am the
I love
Stever.
that.
I am Stever than they are.
You're Steve, the steviest of the Steves.
Oh, most people don't realize that if I'm Stever than all the other Steves, that makes me the Stevest. So that's why I don't call myself Stevest. That would be bragging. So I just say
Oh,
Stever and then
Stever.
let people figure it out for themselves. Oh yeah,
Got it. Got it.
modesty, you know.
Yes, absolutely. So, Stever or Stevest,
Yes, indeed.
what was your path to becoming a self-employed consultant?
Boy. So I was with a number of startups early in my career, and I was coming out of my last startup. I was It was me and five newly minted Harvard MBAs. I'm also a Harvard MBA, so I didn't think anything of it when I joined the company. Turns out going into business with newly minted Harvard MBAs, not a great idea. They have a tendency to be just a wee bit overconfident. And I was older than the rest of them.
Mhm.
And I, of course, had wisdom to impart because although they might be overconfident, my knowledge was surely based on deep understanding and experience. So they should have listened to me, and they didn't. And I was talking with my mentor one day, and I said, Len, I really don't understand why I haven't been more successful in getting them to listen to me because a lot of the things that I have to say, frankly, would avoid the problems we're having. And he said, number one, people don't actually want to be told how to do things better. People want to come up with their ideas on how to do things better, but they're not particularly open to hearing other people's opinions about how they could be better. And also, you are somebody who excels at looking at a situation and understanding how it could be improved, how it could be different, where the problems are, and then recommending those fixes. And as per point one, no one wants that. So he said, you need to get into some type of business situation where you are actively working with people who want you to do that and where you can keep your brain in high engaged problem solving mode all the time because that's where you shine the best. And I was like, okay, and what would that be? And he said, you probably want to be some form of consultant.
Hmm.
And I, I being raised in the sort of corporate education world, I was like, oh, I don't want to go work for McKinsey or Bain or BCG, but there's plenty of self-employed consultants who do just fine. And that was really the path. And it was sort of the final link in my ongoing career long disillusionment with all of the success advice that were given because I followed all of that advice in the corporate world and when I worked for other people. And what I found was most of it was not true. I was about to use a word that
Hmm.
began with B and ended with T and rhymed with um, uh, full grit. But it, people said things like work hard and you'll get ahead. And I was at several companies where I worked very, very hard. And in one case, I actually built the company's entire product from the ground up. I got paid $20,000 for it. And the owner of the company, who did not do the work of building the product, made millions. And I looked at this and I said, so where's that part where I get ahead? Like, where's the part here where I'm the one who benefits from my own labor? And as a consultant, now, of course, there's plenty of things about being a consultant that are far from glorious. But at the very least, I get to benefit from the value that I create. And if I can find ways of creating tremendous value, I get to share in that value as opposed to giving it to a corporation or a boss. And frankly, I like that part.
I like it. What other ver beliefs about success do you feel like we are taught in the, especially looking at the corporate world? So you work hard and you'll benefit, you'll be a success, or you'll benefit and you'll get the
Oh,
commensurate to that, and that's not true, as you've proven. What other myths
well,
or misconceptions do we have about success?
sure. So I mean, there's two. One is do good work, and the other one is work hard, right? And both of those, I would say, are very, very loosely correlated with certain types of success, but they are neither necessary nor sufficient. Um, some of the other things, I guess, that we're told is that things are meritocracies. And I found this one out in a really interesting way. At my first job when I was a manager and I had three programmers working for me. I come from high tech originally. And it was time to do performance reviews. And I had never done a performance review before. This was my inaugural performance review. So I was like, gee, I wonder how to do these. And I went and I started reading up in books and because I like if it's worth doing and if people's lives are going to depend on this, I want to do a good job. And I kind of wrote up my own little evaluation of how I thought the people were doing. And I'm not going to use their real names, but let's just say there was, uh, Al and Aaron and Aesop. And Al and Aaron, I'm like, okay, these two do great work. But Aesop just stays in his cubicle. I never hear anything about him. I never look at his code. He never brings me anything. As far as I can tell, he does nothing. And I was just about prepared to say that Aesop got a C, assuming like A, B, C, D, E, or A, B, C, D, F. And I thought, one of the things that I read about was 360 reviews. So rather than just basing Aesop's performance review on my impression, let me ask Al, I already forgot their names. Let me ask the
Aaron.
other two. the other two A's and find out what they think. And I talked to the other two A's, and they said, "Are you kidding? Aesop is the linchpin that holds this entire team together. Aesop is the one who solves all the hard problems. Aesop is the one who produces bullet-free code for us. Aesop is like fabulous." And I said, "Well, why don't I know this?" And they said, "Well, Aesop was raised in a religious household and considers it to be very bad form to self-promote or be prideful of the job that he does." And I walked away from that and I was thinking, you know what? It's not enough for him to do a good job, because if I don't know that he's doing a good job, then it doesn't matter. Even if the good job gets done, if I don't know it was him, I might let him go because I didn't know he was the one doing the good job. I thought the other two were
Mhm.
doing the good job. And that was one of the moments where I realized, even in a so-called meritocracy, which is what we often quote unquote pride ourselves on being, or at least extol that as a virtue, even in a so-called meritocracy, it's not necessarily about who does the best work or about who does the best job. We're human beings in a social context and a relational context. And it turns out, I will submit that far more important than whether you do a good job, and I am sure that my college professors would be horrified to hear me say this, far more important than whether you do a good job is who knows you, who you know, and the kind of reputation and trust and connection you build with them. Because it is true, all things being equal, I can imagine the person who does the better job will get will get the bread or the brass ring or whatever it is you're competing for. However, all things are not equal. All things are
Mhm.
never equal. And one of the most ignored, it's mind-boggling to me how ignored this is. One of the most ignored success factors, although it does get talked about in self-help circles, is the ability to make and maintain and nurture the right relationships, because those are more important than the other pieces. And if you
True.
doubt this, look at who's running the companies and how they got there. You know, did Tim Cook make it to the head of Apple because he was the best CEO for the job? Well, he's done a good job measured in market share. He's done a horrible job, I think, measured in terms of brand. But no, he was a close executive with Steve Jobs. What if there was somebody 6 layers down in Apple who would have been a 10 times better CEO than Tim Cook has been? It doesn't matter, because that person was not in the boardroom. That person was not talking with Steve Jobs. That person didn't have the connections necessary for them and their thinking to be picked out of the crowd and elevated. So that's a real big one. And in fact, my business these days is much more oriented around what I think of as the real success factors than the other ones. I can keep going if you want. I have some
No,
others.
speaking actually that segues. So what is success to you?
So success to me, um, I wish that I could say it was making tons and tons of money. It turns out I'm kind of unusual. I was raised in a traveling new age polyamorous hippie commune. And when you're raised in such a bizarre environment, you end up with fairly different values than the mainstream has. And, I look around at my friends who have mansions and yachts and things like that. And I ask them how they did it. And they say, "You just have to ignore everything in life that is important to you and do nothing but single mindedly focus on making money every day."
Oh,
And I'm like, let me try that for an hour. And then at the end of the hour, I look down at my notepad and I'm like, huh, I wrote 3 poems. I came up with 6 article ideas. I've created an entirely different way of decision making that could probably improve decision quality by a factor of, oh, there's nothing on here about money. Is that what I was supposed to be doing? Um, but for me, success, I'm going to, can I tell you a quick story?
sure.
All
Love
right.
stories.
Um, I am not a religious man. There's one thing about being raised in a new age commune. When you go through like 9 religions, by the time you're 18, you kind of conclude, okay, religion is just whatever you want to believe. I'm not a religious man, which made it very surprising that one day I fell asleep and I had a dream that I was talking to God. And I'll tell you something. if you're not a religious person and God shows up in your dream, you better listen because maybe there is a God. Maybe God really is talking to you, even though you're not a religious person. So you might want to take heed of what he has to say, just in
Yeah.
case. So we were sitting at this beautiful outdoor cafe on the Champs Elysees, and I could tell this had to have been real God because I've never been to the Champs Elysees, but somehow in the dream I knew that's where we were. And God said, I'm going to share with you the final exam for life. And I was like, what, really? Why?
Ooh.
And God said, well, so that way you can study and plan for it so you can pass it when you get there. And I thought, okay, this sounds awesome. I'm very good at studying and passing exams. Give it to me. Three questions. Question number one is, did you make the most of this wild and wonderful and incredible life that I gave you? Number two was, were you a good steward for the planet? Because there's 7 billion people other than you who also need to use this planet to live their wild and wonderful and incredible life. And number three is, did you help everyone around you do the same? And I don't know if those are really the final exam for life, but those are three really good questions worth living by. And
Mhm.
I would say that those are largely how I define success. And it's potentially different for every person. I can tell you what it is for me personally, but the bigger frame is, are you making the most of your life? Assume that you only go around once. Was it worth it? Did you do things that you found meaningful? Did you contribute? Did you have the relationships that you wanted? Did you have the experiences that you wanted? And that could be as simple as, I had a white picket fence and a house and a car and two kids and a spouse. Or it could be, I used to have lunch on the top of hot air balloons at 10,000 feet right after climbing Mount Everest and see, whatever. It doesn't, the
Mhm.
point is not to be someone who Netflix makes a documentary about. The point is, for you, what constitutes using your life to its fullest? And did you do your best to do that?
Very thought provoking. It's a good question to be asking. We're recording this right before Thanksgiving, and it's kind of one of those good questions to ask around Thanksgiving, when we maybe can be in a little more self-reflective time. But it will be just as good in early February when this podcast goes live. So
Yes,
thank you for that.
please.
So tell us a story or two about a big challenge. You've been doing this for over 17 years, right?
26, 27.
26. Oh,
No, sorry, yeah, 26. Yeah, started in 2000.
okay. So tell us a story or two about the biggest challenges you faced building your practice and how you overcame those challenges.
There's a presupposition that I've overcome those challenges. Um, some I have, some I haven't, frankly. I would say, well, you know what? Let me tell you one of the most interesting ones from early on in my practice. I've been in business for about 5 or 6 years, and I have always looked young for my age. And at the time, I was in my mid 30s, and I could have still passed for a high school student. I mean, I really looked young. And I would go to business conferences, and as people met me, they would reach out their hand to shake my hand, and they would look over my shoulder to see if there was anyone worth talking to as they were shaking my hand.
Right. Like you're
And
too young to be of substance.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And this got really tiring. Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. The pinnacle of this is, I had a leadership column for a fairly prominent business magazine. And I was invited to a conference of the top 100 thought leaders and top CEOs of our network. So here I am in this room. Now, let me be clear. I have this big thing on my chest that says, top 100 thought leader. And I'm sitting here talking to these three CEOs, and one of them looks at me, hands me his glass, and says, "Excuse me, boy, could you please refill this?"
Oh my
He
gosh.
thought that I was one of the waiters. And in that moment, I said, this is actually a problem, and I need to find a way around it. And what are the ways you have of building credibility in the world? Well, one of them is showing up and shaking people's hands. And frankly, if you are a white male with a square jaw and white hair and a particular type of craggy demeanor, then you have the credibility without even having to open your mouth. If you're unbelievably wealthy and famous for it, you have the credibility without even having to open your mouth. But if you are wearing $1,000 suit and you look like a teenager trying to look older by wearing $1,000 suit, that doesn't work.
Not so much, huh?
No. But what I found was that my ideas were things that people responded to. They responded to my ideas and to the way that I framed and communicated those ideas. So I started when I was going to conferences, I started pitching myself as a breakout speaker. And I just happened to be really good at coming up with catchy titles. So I started getting people into the rooms where I was speaking. And then I realized they come to the room based on the title, not based on my picture. Once they show up in the room, even if I look young, I'm the person on stage.
Mm-hmm.
So I get not a free pass, but I get a few minutes to prove myself because everyone is thinking, well, even though there's this weird teenager wearing this suit trying to look older, he's on the front of the stage, so maybe he has something to say. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Well, I learned very quickly that once given that benefit of the doubt, I can hook people and keep them engaged. And the challenge was, how do I gain credibility in a world that really does judge books by its cover? And I didn't have the right cover. I was not your stereotypical powerful business person. I'm still not. I am now the age that I'm supposed to be the powerful business person, and I'm just not. However, I am the smart geek. And if I could take my smart geek superpowers and use that to put my material and my thinking in front of people, that could build enough credibility that then my appearance wouldn't matter. And the people who resonated with my message, they would come up to me afterwards, thus sparing me the social awkwardness because despite being very gregarious and very energetic and very social, I'm also an incredible introvert, which you would never know. You would never suspect once you know me. But I have a lot of awkwardness meeting new people and approaching people. And so this solved that problem because when you're the speaker, the people who want to talk to you, they come to you. Then that was a big breakthrough. That was a moment when I suddenly realized, wait a minute, it's not just about it's not just about me. It's also about the context. It's also about how people are actually judging and evaluating, which may have nothing to do with how I think they're judging and evaluating. And up until then, all of my efforts had been about myself and about like, oh, I should wear this certain thing, as opposed to how do other people learn to perceive credibility.
What other strategies have you developed over the 27 years to establish authority and get taken seriously as an expert?
Sure. Well, one of them is I think by writing. I mean that literally. Like I just take notes all the time, mainly because I have a really bad memory. What's interesting is I never look back at the notes, but it's the process of taking the notes that seems to embed things in my memory. Well, an interesting side effect of this is that I end up with pages and pages and pages and pages of notes. And if I
Mhm.
think through an idea on paper, well, I've got that idea on paper now. Well, given the way the world has gone these days, I will often transcribe my notes and type them into a computer instead of leaving them on scraps of paper. Number one, that reinforces the memory, but number two, now I have them in electronic form.
And they're
So
searchable.
they are searchable and I can even tag them with keywords so that I can find them again quickly. And suddenly now these become an idea file. I've currently got roughly 2,800 ideas in my idea file. I would say I would say at most a third of those are actually good ideas. Probably two-thirds are just momentary insights I had. And if I were to go back and look at them today, I would go like, no, that's some obvious thing that everyone knows. Why did I think that was insightful? But a third of 2,800, that's almost 1,000 ideas.
Yeah.
So of that 1,000 ideas, I would say 97% of that 1,000 ideas, so 970 of them are ideas that other people have had or write about. But 30 of those ideas are ideas that I've never heard anyone else say or write about. And I call those Steverisms. And I actually highlight them in the spreadsheet. I keep this all in the spreadsheet at this point, and I highlight those in the spreadsheet, and those will become talking points. Those will become the way that I introduce a topic when I'm doing public speaking. So, for example, one of the Steverisms is are some of the points that I was talking about with respect to work hard and you'll get ahead, and do a good job and you'll get ahead. Because those are things, it's so funny. Even though a lot of people, if they stop to reflect, will agree with my point, unless they're under 30, in which case they still believe it. Um, they'll stop and reflect and agree, but yet when their kids or their friends say, how can I do better at work? What they tell their friends and what they tell their kids is, oh, you just have to work harder. Like it's so ingrained in us. So that's the Steverism that I lean into pretty heavily. And and it makes me a bit of a contrarian, but again, that's good. A piece of advice that did not come from me came from a woman who does a lot of personal branding stuff named Sally Hogshead. But she says it's better to be different than better. And as someone who's spent most of my life trying to be better and trying to be the best, right? I'm Stever. I'm not Steve. I'm Stever than the other Steves. So clearly I'm trying harder, right? And having spent a lot of my career really trying to be the best and be good at things, that was really quite that was quite shocking when I first read that. And I thought about it. I thought, I think she's right. I hate to say it, but right, because we've already established that doing a good job is not necessarily the thing that's going to get you ahead, but standing out, being noticed will. And that I would say that's a really important one. So I have my idea file, I have my Steverisms, and these days I'm leaning harder into those so that I can distinguish myself. So rather than my success strategy being, let me see if I can be the most perfect corporate doobie and say all the right talking points and be a walking encyclopedia of traditional MBA knowledge, which I am in practice. I mean, I actually have that skills and that knowledge. But instead of leaning into that, because everyone leans into that, and the people who lean into that best are the ones that have gray hair and
Mm.
a square jaw and look like a CEO. And that's not me. And I'm never going to be able to compete with them because we've both got MBAs, but they also have the book cover. And as we've determined, people only buy based on the book cover. However, how many of them can say they were raised in a traveling new age polyamorous hippie commune? And I used to say that just sort of as a joke. I mean, it's true, but I never really gave it much thought. I would just say trot that out occasionally. And earlier this year, when I was thinking about how can I set myself apart, make myself noticed, I realized, wait a minute, that's not a business differentiator, but that's absolutely something that makes me unique. And that, by the way, has a story. That's why I have a different point of view than other people. So instead of saying, let me ignore my different point of view and let me put on my corporate MBA hat and go, hi, I am a McKinsey consultant who just doesn't happen to work for McKinsey, let me lean into it. Say, you know what? If you want a McKinsey consultant, McKinsey will sell you dozens of them. However, if you want someone who is a true out of the box thinker, go with the guy who was raised in the traveling New Age polyamorous hippie commune and then went to Harvard Business School, because that's the person who's going to be able to give you the most insightful, most out of the box thinking. And by the way, he has a really colorful Zoom background. So when he's in a meeting,
Yes.
he gets all the attention and no one except him knows why. And now you do too, those of you who are listening. That was an accident, by the way. I used the colorful background just because I like bright colors. And then I was in this really high powered meeting with like a hundred high powered business people and a world famous presenter. And I kept raising my virtual hand. It was a Zoom thing. And he kept calling on me. And I'm sitting here thinking, I don't understand. There's 100 people on this call. Half of them are Fortune 500 CEOs and me. Why am I the one he keeps calling on? And then I realized when I looked at the little gallery view on Zoom, I'm like, holy cow. Everyone has a beige background except me. So his eye is naturally drawn to me. So when I raise my hand, he notices. And when other people raise their hands, he has to notice the little icon appear in their square. And then I was like, chalk one up for the hippie kid.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, we first talked and you talked about your where your childhood, and then you talked about going to Harvard Business School. I was trying to envision
Why?
somebody raised by hippies the first day
Why would
you
I
walk
do that?
into Harvard Business School, where everybody else is coming from, from Yale and all sorts of East Coast schools, and they've got the button downs and they've got the khaki pants, and you know,
Truth, this is true. I didn't even know what a button down was. I heard people say like, "Oh, you should be wearing a button down." I'm like, I haven't. It's like, is that a sweater? I have no idea what a button down is. And I also, wow, I was really naive. I literally didn't know what khakis were. People kept referring to khakis, and I'm kind of like, is that a brand of blue jean? Like, I don't get it. Um, when I walked into Harvard Business School on my first day, I was wearing a tie-dye t-shirt and ripped blue jeans. And
well, you fit in.
I, well, I did notice that I was the only person in the entire school who was dressed that way. That even that made it through my dense social awareness. And that day after class, first day of school, I had people from my section come up and ask me if I knew where they could buy drugs. So, and the funny part is the answer was no, I didn't do drugs. So, but it was culture shocking. You know, the reason that I went, I didn't go to become a Harvard MBA, whatever that means. I went because I had previously been an engineer, and and I was born with the kind of mind that's really good for some things and really bad for others. But one of the things that's really, really good for is engineering, software engineering. And I wasn't just very good at it, I was superb at it. And I can back that statement up. A lot of yeah, every engineer considers themselves awesome. I can back up my claims of awesomeness. I'm the only person in history to place out of MIT's software engineering lab. Um, and and what I noticed, surprise, surprise, is not only was I not getting ahead by doing such a good job, but the company that I worked for, which had the best product on the market, we had the best product, was going out of business. They had the first round of layoffs 2 weeks after I joined,
Hmm.
right? And that was the same problem that I had as an individual, this company had in the market. And I went to my boss and I said, Nancy, I was brought up to believe that the best product would be the most successful in the marketplace, that that was how you win, was by being the best. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, my sweet summer child." I was like, I guess that's me. She said, you need to learn about marketing and strategy." And I was like, I've never heard those words before. I think strategy has something to do with board games. I have no idea what marketing has to do with, which is ironic because I'm just about to publish a marketing textbook. um, um, the most interesting marketing textbook ever published in human history. Just as a teaser. Um, but I said, okay, so what are marketing and strategy? I don't get it. And she's like, ah, well, to understand marketing and strategy, you either need gray hair or an MBA. And I was like, well, the gray hair will come in time. Turns out I was kind of wrong. Um, I don't really
Yeah, I
this. I
don't
don't
see
dye my
much gray
hair.
hair.
Yeah. Um, so thank goodness I opted for the MBA. But I I went to get the MBA because I wanted to learn about marketing because it became apparent that it wasn't about building the best product. Building the best product was extra. Marketing, strategy, those were the key things. And
Yes.
that was what took this hippie kid to Harvard Business School was realizing that the things I thought would succeed in life weren't the ones that necessarily were the ones. I mean, did they matter? Yes. I actually happen to think that doing a good job at what you do matters. Um,
Mhm.
but it might matter more for personal satisfaction. And it might matter more for things like conserving energy use, not having to replace things as often, et cetera. But it's not what the market necessarily values. And I went to HBS for precisely for that reason. I wanted to learn about marketing and strategy. And can I tell you a secret about my choice to go to HBS?
Yeah.
I didn't really want to learn this that badly. So I decided in advance I was not willing to move. Furthermore, I have an objection to standardized tests. I happen to think that standardized tests, I took a course as an undergrad on how those things are constructed, and there is much a filtering mechanism for the qualities that the people who build the test want them to be a filter for, as they are the measure of anything absolute. And I said I refuse to take a standardized test, and I refuse to move. Any school that I go to for an MBA has got to be walking distance. It just so happened there were only two schools that fit the bill, MIT Sloan School and Harvard Business School. And I missed the MIT Sloan application. So literally the reason I went to HBS versus some other school, I knew I had heard of it, of course. I mean, it's part of the culture. I didn't care that it was the best school in the world or one of the best schools in the world. I went because it was walking distance from my apartment. And I am pretty darn sure that I got in as a diversity admit because I walked in with the true story of my past, and the admissions interviewer was just kind of like, wow, you're like one of the most unusual applicants I've ever talked to. And I was like, I didn't know. I don't know from that. I don't know from business school. But that was the story behind the how this kid. I went to HBS because I wanted the answer to the question, what is marketing and what is strategy? And Google didn't exist.
Right.
And I didn't know. I could have gone to a library, but even at a library, I wouldn't have had the faintest idea what to ask for. So instead, I dropped $100,000 on an MBA. In retrospect, maybe I should have gone to talk to a reference librarian, but um, yeah, it was.
Well, it gave you
It,
credibility. I mean, my undergrad degree was in home economics. After a
same.
couple years out of undergrad, I realized I wanted to be in marketing. And I knew that I was not going to have any credibility as a home ec major, even though I had done jobs in marketing. I never worked in home economics, I worked in marketing, but I knew I needed the credibility of the MBA to be to even get in the door at places like General Mills, which is
Yeah,
where I went right out of graduate school. I wouldn't have I wouldn't have had a chance there coming in with a home ec degree. Maybe in the test kitchens I would have had a
right,
chance. But so,
right.
we're similar in that MBA gave us credibility in the world that we
Yeah,
wouldn't have fit in otherwise.
it's the book cover, and this is something. By the way, I have resented this terribly my entire life. The degree to which we are judged not necessarily on our results and on what we can do, but the degree or our age, but the degree to which we are judged on all of these superficial indicators and are the right boxes checked and are the right degrees checked.
Here's what I want you to take away from this conversation with Stever. First, the rules you learned in corporate don't apply when you're building your own consulting business. Work harder and do better work might have gotten you promoted, but they won't differentiate you in a marketplace full of equally qualified consultants. You need a different strategy. Second, whatever makes you weird, unusual, or different from the traditional consultant mode, that's not something to hide. That's your competitive advantage. Stever turned being raised in a hippie commune into his primary business differentiator. What are you hiding about yourself that could actually be the thing that makes you unforgettable? And third, visibility isn't optional. You can be the best consultant in your field, but if nobody knows about your work, you'll stay stuck in the feast or famine cycle. Self promotion isn't bragging, it's a business necessity. If you're tired of blending in with every other consultant who has similar credentials, stop trying to be better and start being different. That's where your power is. That was part one of my conversation with Stever Robbins. In part two, we'll go even deeper into his unconventional approach to positioning, the book he's writing that challenges everything we think we know about marketing, and his advice for standing out in the age of AI. You can find the links from today's episode, including how to connect with Stever, in the show notes at ajriedel.com. Until next time, keep thriving through.